The area now occupied by the nation of Jordan has had a lot of human activity that goes back thousands of years. During the Bronze Age, from approximately 3600 to 1200 BC, the Wadi Fenan became a regional center for metal, more specifically copper extraction. This increased the trade and activity of the region, and Egypt expanded its territory to include both sides of the Jordan River during this time. During the Iron Age from 1200 to 332 BC, the Egyptians withdrew and the area became established by the kingdoms of Ammon, Edom, and Moab. It's noted that after Esau had a falling out with his brother Jacob, he migrated south into this area and established the kingdom of Edom, where his descendants ruled for a long time. Jacob, of course, gives birth to Joseph, who eventually makes his way to Egypt, where he's eventually joined by the rest of the Israelites. They live there for a long time until they're expelled from the country and go back by means of the Exodus. From Egypt, they move south down the Sinai Peninsula, and eventually Moses gets the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. At the beginning of the book of Numbers, God takes a census at Mount Sinai, and the Israelites move up the Sinai Peninsula toward Canaan. In Numbers 13, the Israelites reach Kadesh Barnea in the desert of Paran. God orders men from each of the 12 tribes to go out and explore the land. In Numbers 14, the people don't like what they hear and rebel. The majority of them end up spending much of their 40 years in the desert in this location. In Numbers 20, Aaron dies near Mount Hor. This is close to modern-day Petra, and his tomb is still located in that area. Throughout much of the rest of the book of Numbers, the people look to advance, but are repelled in all directions and continue to stay in this location. In Deuteronomy 2, the Israelites finally start to move away from this area. They go south and eventually hit Ezion Geber, which is the entry into what will eventually be modern-day Jordan. They go north through the kingdoms of Edom, Moab, and Ammon, during which Moses delivers 3 sermons that fill up much of the book of Deuteronomy. He eventually reaches Mount Nebo and looks across the Jordan at the Promised Land, but of course, he will never reach it himself. He dies there shortly afterwards. At the beginning of the book of Joshua, the Israelites finally pass into the Promised Land near Gilgal. Years later, near this very location, the prophet Elijah ascends into heaven near the river Jordan. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great conquers much of the Persian Empire and introduces Hellenistic culture to much of the Middle East. In 63 BC, the Roman Empire, under Pompey, conquers much of the area and rules for the next 4 centuries. Some key events during the New Testament times in this area: in Matt, Luke, and John, Jesus is baptized in the Jordan River, close to the original crossing point of the Israelites. In Matt, Mark, and Luke, John the Baptist is imprisoned and later beheaded at Machaerus. Under the Romans, Christianity is legal since 313 AD, when the empire splits. The eastern side, later to be known as the Byzantine Empire, controls the region for the next 3 centuries, and Christian churches populate the area. In 636 AD, the Byzantines are defeated by the Muslims. Over the next 9 centuries, the Muslims battle the Crusaders and then the Mongols, but successfully repel them both. In In 1260, the Mamluk Caliphate out of Egypt is in control of the area. And in 1516, the Ottoman Caliphate out of Turkey conquers the area and rules for the next 4 centuries. Finally, in 1916, the Arab Hashemite family, who will eventually rule much of Jordan, starts the Arab Revolt. They're supported by surrounding groups of Bedouins, Circassians, and Christians, and eventually Britain and France. The Europeans at this time gain control. In 1917, the Balfour Declaration endorses the establishment of a home for the Jewish people in Palestine. And a few years later, in 1921, the Emirate of Transjordan is established with Abdullah as the emir or ruler. This encompasses the area which will eventually become modern-day Jordan. In 1948, Israel is established as a new state. Shortly thereafter, in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, Jordan gains control of the West Bank and annexes it a few years later in 1950. Later, during the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel regains control of the West Bank. Finally, in 1994, Israel and Jordan sign a formal peace treaty.